A 17-year-old girl was, she was killed because abetted suicide is murder. And why can't we have, why is this crime not institutionalized? Why are there no institutional provisions to help people like Lavanya? So Lavanya is a 17-year-old girl who deserves justice, and predatory proselytization is not acceptable in the 21st century. And you need to do something about it. Otherwise, it is going to catch up with you sooner or later.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Citti Media. A very good evening. Joining me today for a conversation is Rashmi Samant. We'll be addressing the issue of predatory proselytization, especially after there is a nationwide campaign calling for justice for Lavanya. Rashmi, thank you so much for joining. First of all, how serious is the issue of predatory proselytization? Because a lot of Dravidian parties and the media that's connected to the left is saying that the BJP is only utilizing this to a political advantage.
Well, I think predatory proselytization is a serious problem, especially in India. For a very long time now, missionaries have been conditioning medical, educational aid to convert people and to unfairly convert people. I think we've just scratched the tip of the surface, because every time we try protesting, every time we try bringing up the issue, there's a huge outcry from the missionaries, and it's effectively shut down. I think it's being done in the case of Lavanya as well. They're questioning everything from the legitimacy of the issue to her cause of death, even if there is a deathbed confession, which is proof which is strong enough. So there's this going on, and I think predatory proselytization has been happening for a really long time, and many governments before the BJP government have also tried to take it up, have also tried to set up commissions to investigate it. In fact, I think there is the famous case which happened during Jayalalitha's rule, if I'm not wrong, in Tamil Nadu, which was the Meenakshipuram conversion case, which created a huge outcry. So this is not restricted to any specific government. But of course, it is politicized, because the different groups, the different religious groups are political. They're using political capital to sort of make their voice heard. That is how a society works by the end of the day. So it's easy to shift the blame onto politicians than to address
Correct.
the real issue here.
And Tamil Nadu and Kerala suffer from predatory proselytization perhaps the most. And first of all, Pew Research also indicates that South India has the most number of Christians, at least 50% of them, of which many of the people who are converted, maybe forcefully, maybe voluntarily, to Christianity from other faiths, belong to tribal communities and communities that are extremely vulnerable and poor.
Yeah, the South is, I think, home to more than half of the Christians in India, and that is a well-proven statistical fact. And it is also true that tribals, it is the tribals who are the most vulnerable to this sort of conversion, because after all, it is how they disguise medical and educational help to people that kind of comes forward. Because it's you really can't walk into a big city and try to help people in daylight with something like medical help or educational help with dual intentions, and not get called out, because there are so many people who are politically aware, who are very sort of aware to the standards of what's happening around. But in more rural areas, they're very naive and more sort of willing to accept help with that innocence that people do not have other interests in their mind. I think it also has to do a lot with how a lot of the political parties in the South are placed, and where most of their funding comes from.
I'm glad you arrived there, because recently we saw Karnataka putting anti-conversion law into legislation. Now, statistically speaking, maybe Karnataka is not as much affected as the other states in the south. Um, Considering the event that has happened very recently with what happened to Lavanya, do you think states like Tamil Nadu need to have an anti-conversion law?
Totally, because this is becoming a human rights violation by each passing day. A 17-year-old girl was, she was killed because abetted suicide is murder. And why can't we have, why is this crime not institutionalized? Why are there no institutional provisions to help people like Lavanya? So even today, like millions of children still study in convent schools across India. And of course, we cannot generalize the conditions of each and every convent school based on what happened with Lavanya. But that being said, I think Lavanya is just the tip of the iceberg. So, given that there are millions of children still going to convent schools, we need something in place to protect their interests.
And Rashmi, do you think it's only the Dravidian party that are rather hesitant to implement laws like this?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's all about, when it comes to parties, it's all about where they get their funding from and where they kind of are placed with respect to their allies and everything. And of
Yeah.
late in uh, the South has a lot of, different regional parties, I think more so than the North. And the regional parties have been kind of fighting to stay in power and doing everything that they can to stay in power. So that leads to murky areas like accepting funding from foreign entities, which are aligned with interests such as predatory proselytization.
Right.
So
Why I bring this up is because even the Congress has instituted several committees to deal with predatory proselytization as early as the 1950s, when Prime Minister Nehru was in power. And they acknowledged, because there were hundreds of reports coming in from tribal areas in Madhya Pradesh, that forceful conversion was happening. And even historically, we have a certain precedent set as far as the princely states are concerned. So this is nothing new, because what these Dravidian parties and the left today says is that because of Hindutva emerging as a political force, these kind of issues are being mainstreamed.
yeah, I don't think it's true. I think finally, like the Hindu community is itself waking up to the double standards of media and the rest. It does not require any political party to address it. By the end of the day, political parties are just here to gain votes, and the votes come from communities, and it's all dependent on how well communities organize their interests. The Hindu community has finally been able to, organize itself enough to speak out against predatory proselytization, and that's the only reason it's gaining mainstream acceptance.
Right.
And the left saying what it does is just crying victim and trying to paint a serious human rights violation as a political move. It's not. I mean, a girl dying is not, it's not aligned with any kind of political interest. It is a serious human rights violation which must be called out, and I think we need to ask them why they're not calling it out for what it is, and
Right.
rather coming up with all these lame reasons that it's the hindutva culture. No, it's not. It is a human rights violation and it should be
Hmm.
called out to be so.
This is very interesting that you bring this up, especially because I think the issue of predatory proselytization is itself limited to Abrahamic religions, or let's say non-Indian religions. And why is that? I just want to understand, because I don't think Hindutva or Hinduism, as many would like to call, has ever had problems, at least the major ones, with the other Indic religions.
I think to be very fair, I think the indic religions, they're spiritually very rich. They've got deep sense of philosophical rooting. There is a specific logic so as to why we believe in the things that we do, and it's so in coherence with nature. Whereas the same cannot be said to the Abrahamic religions, which are just a set of rules that are to be followed, not very much in coherence with nature. So the only thing that you can do is basically bribe the Indic people who are in distress to convert, predate on them. So I think that's why it is the non-Abrahamics who, face the onslaught of predatory proselytization on a daily basis. You can also see this in Canada. It's not just related, restricted to India, where the indigenous people were literally, their children were put in schools and boarding schools where they were, forced to believe in things that they did not genuinely want to believe in. And when children realized that, little children realized that, what they were being asked to believe in were not coherent with their, independent beliefs, then they were killed and buried on those campuses. So, today we see so many bodies being recovered, and there's a hue and cry about human rights violation, and the Pope is being asked to apologize. So I think the same holds true for Hindus being asked to forcefully convert as well in these boarding schools or convent schools, because it's literally the same. It's literally the same MO, and there's no difference. But the only difference is this is not being called out.
Right. And what the Congress and a few other parties also say is that, sure, there may be a few cases here and there which are isolated, but does it really call for a legislation? Because when you're talking about, say, the princely states enacting such legislations in the 1850s and the 1900s, you had the British in power. So you had the missionaries which were actively pumping in money to also aid the British Empire in conquering certain territories and fabricating and falsifying social identities, right? So in that sense, after independence, India has regained power. So this is not really an issue, and here and there cases do happen. Is in fact what even Archbishop Peter Machado said when anti-conversion law was being discussed in Karnataka.
So I think, people must be kidding themselves when they think that colonization is over. It's not. We have just moved into an era of neocolonialism where we are still being controlled economically and, in different ways by the erstwhile colonial powers. We still have money coming in through missionaries, through all of these different entities which are set up around India, which are just doing what they were before, but it's being packaged very nicely to look very humanitarian, to look very 21st century appropriate, but it's not. It's just doing what it did 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It's just doing the same thing, but it's just being packaged better to the sort of sensibilities of a 21st century human. And I think, a few years later, we can really see where we failed as society in curbing these neocolonialistic, agenda-driven entities within our own society.
Right. And what can exactly be done as far as spreading awareness to the society is concerned? Because I again reiterate what you said the first time in this interview, that many sections in the media itself are downplaying this entire incident and questioning the very validity of facts. He is saying that there may be other natural or unnatural reasons for the death of Lavanya.
Well, I think nothing can be done for those who are in denial of these things for whatever personal agendas they carry. But as as the Hindu community, we need to raise this issue more and more, because there is a certain power to what the community can come out and say, and we do not have any sort of personal agenda as a community, but maybe some people who represent heads of certain organizations might. So I think as a community we need to stay strong on what we think went wrong with Lavanya, and in Lavanya's case, and kind of stick to that and not stop talking about it until until we reach some sort of a possible solution and get everybody talking about it, because only when more and more people talk about it can we force entities to also speak about it, because then it will just be too dubious if they're not raising it.
But also in a way are the Dravidian parties sort of waking up the gentle giant that has been asleep for a very long time? Because if you see, the RSS BJP combine has been working for several decades now to sort of reinstate dharma into Kerala and Tamil Nadu. But the point is that these two states are intrinsically very dharmic from the beginning, except it's that it's overridden by Dravidian agenda today. So in that sense, does it need a cause or a motivation to sort of make people realize this?
I think the cause and motivation has always been there. It's about living in peace and harmony, and that cannot happen as long as you have entities who are constantly trying to disturb the social fabric. For a lot of us, living as a community is our religion, is the people that we interact with on a daily basis, and that social fabric cannot be broken, because if that is broken, then there won't be any stability to our society. So I think that is enough. And the more we mobilize as a community, even the Dravidian parties are going to realize that, I think by the end of the day, parties are just where the vote banks are. And we as a Hindu community have never organized ourselves as a political group, as a group which could be a potential vote bank. So
Right.
the minute we align ourselves together and put out our interests out there in the open, that this is not acceptable to us as a community, predatory proselytization is not acceptable to us, then the next day the Dravidian parties are just going to change their clothes. I mean, it is the way the political parties operate, not just here in India or the Dravidian side. It is around the world. They respond to what the people want.
Rashmi, if there is one last message that you would like to send across to the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, what would that be?
That that Lavanya is a 17-year-old girl who deserves justice, and predatory proselytization is not acceptable in the 21st century, and you need to do something about it. Otherwise, it is going to catch up with you sooner or later.
Thank you so much, Rashmi, for joining us today. We genuinely hope that the Tamil Nadu government acts very soon on this and finds out the actual motivations behind this. Until then, please stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.